All right, here we are with we want to do some hands-on now and go through carefully and explain and demonstrate how to create a self-signed certificate. And in my case, I'm defining a scenario. Okay, so what I'm saying here is my scenario is I want to sign a self-signed certificate to my ESXi server, and then I want to configure my technician PC. What I'm calling my technician PC is the PC I'm sitting at to honor that certificate. Remember, self-signed certificates are only good if we choose to trust them. So I want to configure my PC, what I'm calling the technician PC, to trust that certificate. Okay. Now, just again, as some framework here, self-signed certificates are really great for any resource that has a web interface that is not intended for the general public. Okay. In my case, in this demonstration, I'm going to generate a certificate, a self-signed certificate that's good for 10 years. That's a very long time. When we go the other route, when we generate, or excuse me, when we purchase or generate third-party certificates, you'll find that they're good for anywhere from a few months. A few months is common, a year is pretty common, but you go beyond a year and not so common. And the cost goes up as you ask for a longer and longer certificate for it to be valid. Okay. All right. So you may not fully appreciate this because you haven't experienced, installing a third-party certificate and then having to renew it every so many months. Okay. So again, get the picture right and or my scenario correct in that we're saying you've got equipment where you work that only support people access, but they're accessed through a web interface. They give name and password in accessing this equipment, storage area networks, firewalls, appliances of different kinds, ESXi servers, a long list of stuff like this, but it's not intended for the general public. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a wildcard certificate that's good for 10 years that we can install on that equipment so that our communication with that equipment is all encrypted. Okay, all right, so that's my scenario. So step one is on my technician PC, I need to add the certificates MMC snap-in. Okay, let me pause the video and then I'll get that set up. Okay, so I've opened a run box, I've typed in MMC, I click on OK, and I've got a Microsoft Management Console. I go up to File, I go to Add Remove Snap-ins, and I go to Certificate. There it is, Certificates. Okay, the certificates tool is not installed by default. This is how you do it. This is how you get to the certificates tool. So I click on certificates, that's all I need. I click on add. It wants to know now of which certificate, what's the certificate MMC going to be looking for. And in our case, we're going to be working with a computer account. We want to validate this computer as well as the ESXi server. Okay, so not a user, not a service, but a computer account. Very, very common. Next thing it wants to know is, well, what computer? And in this case, I'm going to create the certificate on this computer, and then I'll export it and get it ready to then copy over and bring into my ESXi server. Okay, all right. So did you get those steps okay? Microsoft Management Console, MMC, certificates, add, computer certificate, local computer. Okay, and there it is. Okay. Now, I'm going to take a minute to let you look at this. I said earlier that third-party certificates become trusted because the operating system honors them. And you think, where does that happen? Let me show you. If we go here to Trusted Routes and we look at this, this is our certificate store. Most everything in here comes from a third-party trusted certificate authority. Right? When we purchase certificates, they come from one of these vendors, maybe directly or indirectly, but they're tied to one of these. And you'll see that when I get into the talking with you and demonstrating with you third-party certificates. So this is the Windows certificate store. I'm on a Windows 10 machine. If we were to look on a Linux machine, we'd see a similar certificate store, a Mac, same Android. Every operating system has one of these. These are the certificates that the operating system has chosen to trust. This is the list that Microsoft this is several years ago now, it's becoming an old story. They would sell, they offered to put you on this list for a high premium. Okay, it's more than just getting them on this list. You have to go through a process of being trusted. Okay, so it's a big deal to be on this list. It's a big deal. Okay, this is our certificate store. If we go look at our personal store, right now we don't have anything in there. Okay. Okay, I'm going to pause the video now and I'm going to move on to the next step, which is to take a look at PowerShell. Okay, I've got PowerShell loaded, and I loaded PowerShell as an administrator. I tried it without earlier and it doesn't work. You have to load PowerShell as an administrator. Okay, now what I'm going to do in PowerShell is I'm going to use a provided PowerShell command to generate a self-signed certificate. Let's take a look at that syntax before we do it. This I had to make small. Down here, I had to make this small to get it all to fit. Okay, this first line here is my example. Here's the PowerShell, the command, new self-signed cert. Okay, so this is an example, and I got this. I should give reference to the website where I got this off of, and I'm sorry that I didn't. Okay, so a gentleman shared this on the internet. He talked about how he created this, and I read his article and I pulled this off. I pulled this PowerShell syntax off of his website. Okay, now what I've got here in the second line is I've now put in my values. Okay, so you can see here I substituted bobstaco.com, and the fact that I'm using an asterisk, that makes it a wildcard cert, and that's what I want. Okay, you can get single host. The term they use actually is they use domain. It's a little bit confusing for us from a Windows background as we think about domain names, we think about Active Directory domains. But in certificates, a domain would be what you and I would think of as a fully qualified domain name, like www.bobstaco.com, okay, or ESXi 19.bobstaco.com. Okay, these certificates are much easier to get. Okay, in other words, I generate a certificate that is only valid for one host or maybe a couple hosts. They call them a domain certificate. You can generate these for 6 months, up for 3 to 6 months at no charge. And for one host, it's real easy. What is harder is what I want to show you here. And that's to do a wildcard, meaning any ESXi server or any server at all at bobstaco.com. So I'm gonna create one certificate, just one, but I'm going to use it on ESXi1, ESXi2, 15, 17, 19. I'm going to use it on san1.bobstaco.com, san2. I'm going to use it on pf1.bobstaco.com. I'm going to use this one certificate all over my enterprise. Okay, and I want to do that. I want to create one certificate, to rule them all. Did you get that reference? One certificate to rule them all. So to do that, that's called a wildcard certificate. Like in card games where, you got a wild card and it can substitute for anything else. So I'm going to create, in this example here, I'm going to create a wildcard certificate for bobstaco.com. And then this here is the syntax to do that, this line. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring PowerShell over, and I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to copy that syntax and paste it into PowerShell so we can have a look. All right, so I've got PowerShell, and again, I opened it as an administrator, and I've tried to make my font a little bit bigger, but you can see it's a pretty long string of code, and I wanted to leave it as one string of code. I didn't want to break it up, and so let's go through and look at it before we execute it. Okay, so as we mentioned before, this is the PowerShell. Let me switch colors here. This is the actual PowerShell command. And this replaces an earlier command used by Microsoft called make cert. Okay, make cert was an executable, and Microsoft, several years ago replaced it with this one, with the PowerShell command. Okay, then you just get into syntax, and I won't go into detail here because you could substitute your own information. Now, again, this is for a wildcard cert. If you wanted to do a single cert, then remove the asterisk and put in something like ESXi1 or www, and you can find other examples on the internet that will show you how to put like 2 or 3 names in this. Again, when we do demos like on a big topic like this, I've got to limit my demos. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a wildcard cert, right? Let's scroll over and talk a little bit more about what's going on. Okay, so this wildcard cert, if we get past all the names, it's going to be imported. What this part here does is it puts it directly into my certificate store. Now, that's the MMC that I created earlier. Okay, it's gonna, when it creates a certificate, it's gonna put it in that store. It's gonna put it in my local machine, and my is just a subfolder of that. You'll see that when I'm done here, but it's not going to save it to the file system. It's not going to put it on the C drive or anything like that. It's actually going to put it into the certificate store on this machine where I'm running the command from, and then I'll have to export it. Okay. Now this last part here, if you don't put this on here, it'll create a certificate good for 1 year. Okay. I want one longer. I don't want to have to do this every 12 months. Um, honestly, when I do this, I think 5 years is a good window. I just went for 10 years because I'm kind of exaggerating the point here. Okay, so this is get today's date and add 10 years to it, and that's going to be the validity of this certificate. Okay, that's our goal here. Let's see if we can get it to run. Okay. So I come up here, I select my line of code, and I ask it to run. Whew. Okay, I'm breathing a sigh of relief. This is good. It tells me that it ran. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause the video again. I'm going to go back into my certificate store, and I'm going to go find that certificate that it just created for me and take a look at it. Okay, so here I am, same machine. I'm still sitting in the same chair. I did hit F5. I refreshed it here, and that gave me this subfolder. Now, if you remember before when we were here, we had personal, it was empty. Now we have a certificates folder below it, and here's the certificate that we just created. Let's take a look at it. Okay, it's valid from today for 10 years. Okay. It tells us up here that this is not trusted. Okay. The fact that it's not trusted means that unless we prepare a PC beforehand, it will go to our ESXi server and it'll say that this certificate is not trusted. Okay. Remember, when you're using self-signed certificates, you put your self-signed certificate onto your device, in our case an ESXi server, but you also have to import the certificate onto the computer that's going to access that ESXi server. So you have to get both parts of it. If you do a third-party certificate, you don't have to do that part. You don't have to do that. In other words, okay, if I go back to here, if I go here, if I generate a certificate from here, which we're going to do in another demo, then you don't have to do anything on the client. Nothing. And that's the value of it. Some stranger can go to your ESXi server if you've generated a third party. We call these third party certificate, and your stranger's computer or web browser will smile. It'll say, this is a good certificate, it's trusted. Okay, so once again, I've got this here. Now, while I'm here, let me export it. Okay, all right, so I right click on it. Actually, let me do something first. I'm going to pause the video and go create a directory called temp on my C drive that I'm going to send the certificate to. Okay, I just wanted you to see it here. I went to my C drive. It could be a D drive, it could be a memory stick, it could be anything, but I need a place to export the certificate to. And so I've chosen to create just a folder called temp. Okay, so I'm going to move that out of the way. So now when I go to export it, okay, all tasks and export. It's going to ask me some questions here. Okay. Do I wish to export the private key? And the answer is yes. The server that I'm going to put this onto, my goal is to get this onto my ESXi server, right? My ESXi server needs both the certificate file, the CRT file, and the private key. Remember, the private key is the part that you want to guard. So I say, yes, export the private key. Okay, it's defaulted some values here for me. I don't have any extended properties. In other words, an extended property would be where a certificate is a child of another certificate, or you have what's called an intermediary certificate. I don't have that. It's just self-signed, and so I don't need to check that. But I'm going to check it just out of habit, because if you're exporting certificates in general, often you'll need the extended properties of that certificate. Okay, so I'm getting ready to export it. I need to assign a password to it. Why? Well, because that private key is truly important. If that's compromised, then my certificate is invalid, or other somebody else could exploit it. Okay, so I put a password on it, and I put a password on it again. Wants to know where. And I'm going to call this Wildcard Bob's Taco self-signed 10-year. Okay. Notice the format that it's going to export it as. It's going to export it as a PFX file. Okay. That's my only choice. From where, again, this is Windows. It's a Windows class, and so I'm showing you everything in Windows. Think, well, Randy, is there other choices? Yes, actually there is. The more popular way, industry-wide, the more popular way to do what we're doing is to use an open source tool or an open source project called OpenSSL. OpenSSL is on widely used on Linux. They have a Windows port, meaning that they've taken the executable or the binaries and made it to where it would run on Windows. And I've used it, and it's really good. But this is a Windows class, and so we're doing it on Windows. Okay, but please know that OpenSSL is well documented and another option, especially if you're in a non-Windows environment, especially. Okay, so I'm exporting that in my PFX file. Okay. All right, so it's done. All right, so I'm going to shrink that now. I've got it out. Now let's look at our notes here. Okay, we exported the certificate, and it's a PFX file. Now what we need to do, that PFX file is not useful to us on our ESXi server. Our ESXi server needs a CRT file and a key file. So I'm going to wrap up this video, and I'm going to start another video. And what we're going to do in part 2 is we're going to go and use a tool. I have a tool that I favor here. It's this one right here. It's actually a website. And I'm going to show you how to convert it from a PFX format into a PEM format. And then the PEM format, well, I'll show you, okay? And again, this process of converting between formats, it's well documented on OpenSSL. Okay, so that's what we're going to do in part 2. We're going to go in and convert our certificate that we created using PowerShell on a Windows machine, and we exported it. We're going to then go to a tool and convert it to a different format. We're then going to open it up and find the CRT file and the key file. We're going to then rename those, and we're going to then bring those over to our ESXi server, and we're going to watch what happens. Okay, so let me wrap up this video, and I'll see you on part 2.